Chapter 17 of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, by Giacomo Casanova. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, The Venetian Years, by Giacomo Casanova. Chapter 17. I turn out a worthless fellow. My good fortune. I become a rich nobleman. With an education which ought to have ensured me an honorable standing in the world, with some intelligence, wit, good literary and scientific knowledge, and endowed with those accidental physical qualities which are such a good passport into society, I found myself, at the age of 20, the mean follower of a sublime art, in which, if great talent is rightly admired, mediocrity is as rightly despised. I was compelled by poverty to become a member of a musical band, in which I could expect neither esteem nor consideration, and I was well aware that I should be the laughingstock of the persons who had known me as a doctor in divinity, as an ecclesiastic, and as an officer in the army, and had welcomed me in the highest society. I knew all that, for I was not blind to my position, but contempt, the only thing to which I could not have remained indifferent, never showed itself anywhere under a form tangible enough for me to have no doubt of my being despised, and I set it at defiance, because I was satisfied that contempt is due only to cowardly, mean actions, and I was conscious that I had never been guilty of any. As to public esteem, which I have been ever anxious to secure, my ambition was slumbering, and satisfied with being my own master, I enjoyed my independence without puzzling my head about the future. I felt that, in my first profession, as I was not blessed with the vocation necessary to it, I should have succeeded only by dint of hypocrisy, and I should have been despicable in my own estimation, even if I had seen the purple mantle on my shoulders, for the greatest dignities cannot silence a man's own conscience. If, on the other hand, I had continued to seek fortune in a military career, which is surrounded by a halo of glory, but is otherwise the worst of professions for the constant self-abnegation, for the complete surrender of one's will which passive obedience demands, I should have required a patience to which I could not lay claim, as every kind of injustice was revolting to me, and as I could not bear to feel myself dependent. Besides, I was of opinion that a man's profession, whatever it might be, ought to supply him with enough money to satisfy all his wants, and the very poor pay of an officer would never have been sufficient to cover my expenses, because my education had given me greater wants than those of officers in general. By scraping my violin I earned enough to keep myself without requiring anybody's assistance, and I have always thought that the man who can support himself is happy. I grant that my profession was not a brilliant one, but I did not mind it, and, calling prejudices all the feelings which rose in my breast against myself, I was not long in sharing all the habits of my degraded comrades. When the play was over, I went with them to the drinking booth, which we often left intoxicated to spend the night in houses of ill fame. When we happened to find these places already tenanted by other men, we forced them by violence to quit the premises, and defrauded the miserable victims of prostitution of the mean salary the law allows them, after compelling them to yield to our brutality. Our scandalous proceedings often exposed us to the greatest danger. We would very often spend the whole night rambling about the city, inventing and carrying into execution the most impertinent practical jokes. One of our favorite pleasures was to unmoor the patricians' gondolas, and let them float at random along the canals, enjoying by anticipation all the curses that gondoliers would not fail to indulge in. We would rouse up hurriedly in the middle of the night an honest midwife, telling her to hasten to Madame So-and-so, who, not even being pregnant, was sure to tell her that she was a fool when she called at the house. We did the same with physicians, whom we often sent half-dressed to some nobleman who was enjoying excellent health. The priests fared no better. We would send them to carry the last sacraments to married men who were peacefully slumbering near their wives, and not even thinking of extreme unction. We were in the habit of cutting the wires of the bells in every house, and if we chanced to find a gate open, we would go up the stairs in the dark and frighten the sleeping inmates by telling them very loudly that the house door was not closed, after which we would go down, making as much noise as we could, and leave the house with the gate wide open. During a very dark night we formed a plot to overturn the large marble table of St. Angelo's Square, on which it is said that in the days of the League of Cambrai, the commissaries of the Republic were in the habit of paying the bounty to the recruits who engaged to fight under the standard of St. Mark, a circumstance which secured for the table a sort of public veneration. Whenever we could contrive to get into a church tower, we thought it great fun to frighten all the parish by ringing the alarm bell, as if some fire had broken out. But that was not all. We always cut the bell ropes, so that in the morning the churchwardens had no means of summoning the faithful to early mass. Sometimes we would cross the canal, each of us in a different gondola, and take to our heels without paying as soon as we landed on the opposite shore, in order to make the gondoliers run after us. The city was alive with complaints, and we laughed at the useless search made by the police to find out those who disturbed the peace of the inhabitants. We took good care to be careful, for if we had been discovered, we stood a very fair chance of being sent to practice rowing at the expense of the Council of 10. We were 7, sometimes 8, because, being much attached to my brother Francois, I gave him a share now and then in our nocturnal orgies. But at last fear put a stop to our criminal jokes, which in those days I used to call only the frolics of young men. This is the amusing adventure which closed our exploits. In every one of the 72 parishes of the city of Venice, there is a large public house called Magazzino. It remains open all night, and wine is retailed there at a cheaper price than in all the other drinking houses. People can likewise eat in the Magazzino, but they must obtain what they want from the pork butcher nearby, who has the exclusive sale of eatables, and likewise keeps his shop open throughout the night. The pork butcher is usually a very poor cook, but he is cheap. Poor people are willingly satisfied with him, and these resorts are considered very useful to the lower class. The nobility, the merchants, even workmen in good circumstances, are never seen in the Magazzino, for cleanliness is not exactly worshipped in such places. Yet there are a few private rooms which contain a table surrounded with benches, in which a respectable family or a few friends can enjoy themselves in a decent way. It was during the carnival of 1745, after midnight. We were, all the 8 of us, rambling about together with our masks on, in quest of some new sort of mischief to amuse us, and we went into the Magazzino of the parish of the Holy Cross to get something to drink. We found the public room empty, but in one of the private chambers we discovered 3 men quietly conversing with a young and pretty woman, and enjoying their wine. Our chief, a noble Venetian, belonging to the Balbi family, said to us, it would be a good joke to carry off those 3 blockheads, and to keep the pretty woman in our possession. He immediately explained his plan, and under cover of our masks we entered their room, Balbi at the head of us. Our sudden appearance rather surprised the good people, but you may fancy their astonishment when they heard Balbi say to them, "Under penalty of death, and by order of the Council of 10, I command you to follow us immediately, without making the slightest noise. As to you, my good woman, you need not be frightened, you will be escorted to your house." When he had finished his speech, 2 of us got hold of the woman to take her where our chief had arranged beforehand, and the others seized the 3 poor fellows, who were trembling all over, and had not the slightest idea of opposing any resistance. The waiter of the Magazzino came to be paid, and our chief gave him what was due, enjoining silence under penalty of death. We took our 3 prisoners to a large boat. Balbi went to the stern, ordered the boatman to stand at the bow, and told him he need not inquire where we were going, that he would steer himself whichever way he thought fit. Not one of us knew where Balbi wanted to take the 3 poor devils. He sails all along the canal, gets out of it, takes several turnings, and in a quarter of an hour we reach St. George, where Balbi lands our prisoners, who are delighted to find themselves at liberty. After this, the boatman is ordered to take us to St. Genevieve, where we land after paying for the boat. We proceed at once to Balombo Square, where my brother and another of our band were waiting for us with our lovely prisoner, who was crying. "Do not weep, my beauty," says Balbi to her. "We will not hurt you. We intend only to take some refreshment at the Rialto, and then we will take you home in safety." "Where is my husband?" "Never fear, you shall see him again tomorrow." Comforted by that promise, and as gentle as a lamb, she followed us to the Two Swords. We ordered a good fire in a private room, and everything we wanted to eat and drink having been brought to us, we sent the waiter away, and remain alone. We take off our masks, and the sight of 8 young, healthy faces seems to please the beauty we had so unceremoniously carried off. We soon managed to reconcile her to her fate by the gallantry of our proceedings, encouraged by a good supper and by the stimulus of wine, prepared by our compliments and by a few kisses. She realizes what is in store for her, and does not seem to have any unconquerable objection. Our chief, as a matter of right, claims the privilege of opening the ball, and by dint of sweet words he overcomes the very natural repugnance she feels at consummating the sacrifice in so numerous company. She, doubtless, thinks the offering agreeable, for when I present myself as the priest appointed to sacrifice a second time to the god of love, she receives me almost with gratitude, and she cannot conceal her joy when she finds out that she is destined to make us all happy. My brother Francois alone exempted himself from paying the tribute, saying that he was ill, the only excuse which could render his refusal valid, for we had established as a law that every member of our society was bound to do whatever was done by the others. After that fine exploit, we put on our masks, and the bill being paid, escorted the happy victim to St. Job, where she lived, and did not leave her till we had seen her safe in her house and the street door closed. My readers may imagine whether we felt inclined to laugh when the charming creature bade us good night, thanking us all with perfect good faith. 2 days afterwards our nocturnal orgy began to be talked of. The young woman's husband was a weaver by trade, and so were his 2 friends. They joined together to address a complaint to the Council of 10. The complaint was candidly written, and contained nothing but the truth, but the criminal portion of the truth was veiled by a circumstance which must have brought a smile on the grave countenances of the judges, and highly amused the public at large, the complaint setting forth that the 8 masked men had not rendered themselves guilty of any act disagreeable to the wife, and went on to say that the 2 men who had carried her off had taken her to such a place where they had, an hour later, been met by the other 6, and that they had all repaired to the Two Swords, where they had spent an hour in drinking. The said lady, having been handsomely entertained by the 8 masked men, had been escorted to her house, where she had been politely requested to excuse the joke perpetrated upon her husband. The 3 plaintiffs had not been able to leave the island of St. George until daybreak, and the husband, on reaching his house, had found his wife quietly asleep in her bed. She had informed him of all that had happened. She complained of nothing but of the great fright she had experienced on account of her husband, and on that account she entreated justice and the punishment of the guilty parties. That complaint was comic throughout, for the 3 rogues showed themselves very brave in writing, stating that they would certainly have not given way so easily if the dread authority of the council had not been put forth by the leader of the band. The document produced 3 different results. In the first place, it amused the town. In the second, all the idlers of Venice went to St. Job to hear the account of the adventure from the lips of the heroine herself, and she got many presents from her numerous visitors. In the third place, the Council of 10 offered a reward of 500 ducats to any person giving such information as would lead to the arrest of the perpetrators of the practical joke, even if the informer belonged to the band, providing he was not the leader. The offer of that reward would have made us tremble if our leader, precisely the one who alone had no interest in turning informer, had not been a patrician. The rank of Balbi quieted my anxiety at once, because I knew that, even supposing one of us were vile enough to betray our secret for the sake of the reward, the tribunal would have done nothing in order not to implicate a patrician. There was no cowardly traitor amongst us, although we were all poor, but fear had its effect, and our nocturnal pranks were not renewed. 3 or 4 months afterwards, the Chevalier Nicholas Iron, then one of the inquisitors, astonished me greatly by telling me the whole story, giving the names of all the actors. He did not tell me whether any one of the band had betrayed the secret, and I did not care to know, but I could clearly see the characteristic spirit of the aristocracy, for which the solo mihi is the supreme law. Towards the end of April of the year 1746, Messer Girolamo Cornaro, the eldest son of the family Cornario della Reine, married a daughter of the house of Soranzo de Saint Pol, and I had the honour of being present at the wedding, as a fiddler. I played the violin in one of the numerous bands engaged for the balls which were given for 3 consecutive days in the Soranzo palace. On the 3rd day, towards the end of the dancing, an hour before daybreak, feeling tired, I left the orchestra abruptly, and as I was going down the stairs I observed a senator, wearing his red robes, on the point of getting into a gondola. In taking his handkerchief out of his pocket, he let a letter drop on the ground. I picked it up, and coming up to him just as he was going down the steps, I handed it to him. He received it with many thanks, and inquired where I lived. I told him, and he insisted upon my coming with him in the gondola, saying that he would leave me at my house. I accepted gratefully, and sat down near him. A few minutes afterwards he asked me to rub his left arm, which, he said, was so benumbed that he could not feel it. I rubbed it with all my strength, but he told me in a sort of indistinct whisper that the numbness was spreading all along the left side, and that he was dying. I was greatly frightened. I opened the curtain, took the lantern, and found him almost insensible, and the mouth drawn on one side. I understood that he was seized with an apoplectic stroke, and called out to the gondoliers to land me at once, in order to procure a surgeon to bleed the patient. I jumped out of the gondola, and found myself on the very spot where 3 years before I had taught Rosetta such a forcible lesson. I inquired for a surgeon at the first coffee house, and ran to the house that was pointed out to me. I knocked as hard as I could. The door was at last opened, and I made the surgeon follow me in his dressing gown as far as the gondola, which was waiting. He bled the senator while I was tearing my shirt to make the compress and the bandage. The operation being performed, I ordered the gondoliers to row as fast as possible, and we reached St. Marina. The servants were roused up, and taking the sick man out of the gondola, we carried him to his bed, almost dead. Taking everything upon myself, I ordered a servant to hurry out for a physician, who came in a short time, and ordered the patient to be bled again, thus approving the first bleeding prescribed by me. Thinking I had the right to watch the sick man, I settled myself near his bed to give him every care he required. An hour later 2 noblemen, friends of the senator, came in, one a few minutes after the other. They were in despair. They had inquired about the accident from the gondoliers, and having been told that I knew more than they did, they loaded me with questions which I answered. They did not know who I was, and did not like to ask me, whilst I thought it better to preserve a modest silence. The patient did not move. His breathing alone showed that he was still alive. Fomentations were constantly applied, and the priest who had been sent for, and was of very little use during such circumstances, seemed to be there only to see him die. All visitors were sent away by my advice, and the 2 noblemen and myself were the only persons in the sick man's room. At noon we partook silently in some dinner which was served in the sick room. In the evening one of the 2 friends told me that if I had any business to attend to I could go, because they would both pass the night on a mattress near the patient. "And I, sir," I said, "will remain near his bed in this armchair, for if I went away the patient would die, and he will live as long as I am near him." This sententious answer struck them with astonishment, as I expected it would, and they looked at each other in great surprise. We had supper, and in the little conversation we had I gathered the information that the senator, their friend, was M. de Bragadin, the only brother of the procurator of that name. He was celebrated in Venice not only for his eloquence and his great talents as a statesman, but also for the gallantries of his youth. He had been very extravagant with women, and more than one of them had committed many follies for him. He had gambled and lost a great deal, and his brother was his most bitter enemy, because he was infatuated with the idea that he had tried to poison him. He had accused him of that crime before the Council of Ten, which, after an investigation of 8 months, had brought in a verdict of not guilty. But that just sentence, although given unanimously by that high tribunal, had not the effect of destroying his brother's prejudices against him. M. de Bragadin, who was perfectly innocent of such a crime and impressed by an unjust brother who deprived him of half his income, spent his days like an amiable philosopher, surrounded by his friends, amongst whom were the two noblemen who were then watching him. One belonged to the Dandolo family, the other was a Barbaro, and both were excellent men. M. de Bragadin was handsome, learned, cheerful, and most kindly disposed. He was then about 50 years old. The physician who attended him was named Tero. He thought, by some peculiar train of reasoning, that he could cure him by applying a mercurial ointment to the chest, to which no one raised any objection. The rapid effect of the remedy delighted the two friends, but it frightened me, for in less than 24 hours the patient was laboring under great excitement of the brain. The physician said that he had expected that effect, but on the following day the remedy would act less on the brain and diffuse its beneficial action through the whole of the system, which required to be invigorated by a proper equilibrium in the circulation of the fluids. At midnight the patient was in a state of high fever and a fearful state of irritation. I examined him closely and found him hardly able to breathe. I roused up his two friends and declared that in my opinion the patient would die unless the fatal ointment was at once removed. Without waiting for their answer, I bared his chest, took off the plaster, washed the skin carefully with lukewarm water, and in less than 3 minutes he breathed freely and fell into a quiet sleep. Delighted with such a fortunate result, we lay down again. The physician came very early in the morning, and was much pleased to see his patient so much better. But when M. Dandolo informed him what had been done, he was angry, saying it was enough to kill his patient, and asked who had been so audacious as to destroy the effect of his prescription. M. de Bragadin, speaking for the first time, said to him, "Doctor, the person who has delivered me from your mercury, which was killing me, is a more skilled physician than you." And, saying these words, he pointed to me. It would be hard to say who was the more astonished, the doctor, when he saw an unknown young man, whom he must have taken for an impostor, declared more learned than himself, or I, when I saw myself transformed into a physician at a moment's notice. I kept silent, looking very modest, but hardly able to control my mirth, whilst the doctor was staring at me with a mixture of astonishment and of spite, evidently thinking me some bold quack who had tried to supplant him. At last, turning towards M. de Bragadin, he told him coldly that he would leave him in my hands. He was taken at his word. He went away, and, behold, I had become the physician of the most illustrious member of the Venetian Senate. I must confess that I was very glad of it, and I told my patient that a proper diet was all he needed, and that nature, assisted by the approaching fine season, would do the rest. The dismissed physician related the affair throughout the town, and, as M. de Bragadin was rapidly improving, one of his relations who came to see him told him that everybody was astonished at his having chosen for his physician a fiddler from the theatre. But the senator put a stop to his remarks by answering that a fiddler could know more than all the doctors in Venice, and that he owed his life to me. The worthy nobleman considered me as his oracle. His two friends listened to me with the deepest attention. Their infatuation encouraged me. I spoke like a learned physician. I dogmatized. I quoted authors whom I had never read. M. de Bragadin, who had the weakness to believe in the occult sciences, told me one day that, for a young man of my age, he thought my learning too extensive, and that he was certain that I was the possessor of some supernatural endowment. He entreated me to tell him the truth. What extraordinary things will sometimes occur from mere chance or from the force of circumstances! Unwilling to hurt his vanity by telling him that he was mistaken, I took the wild resolution of informing him, in the presence of his two friends, that I possessed a certain numeral calculus, which gave answers, also in numbers, to any questions I liked to put. M. de Bragadin said that it was Solomon's key, vulgarly called cabalistic science, and he asked me from whom I had learnt it. From an old hermit, I answered, who lives in the Carpegna mountains, and whose acquaintance I made quite by chance when I was a prisoner in the Spanish army. The hermit, remarked the senator, has, without informing you of it, linked an invisible spirit to the calculus he has taught you, for simple numbers cannot have the power of reason. You possess a real treasure, and you may derive great advantages from it. I do not know, I said, in what way I can make my science useful, because the answers given by the numerical figures are often so obscure that I have felt discouraged, and I have very seldom tried to make use of my calculus. Yet it is very true that, if I had not formed my pyramid, I should never have had the happiness of knowing your excellency. Well, how so? On the second day, during the festivities of the Soranzo Palace, I inquired of my oracle whether I should meet at the ball anyone whom I should not care to see. The answer I obtained was this: leave the ballroom at precisely 4 o'clock. I obeyed implicitly and met your excellency. The three friends were astounded. M. Dandolo asked me whether I would answer a question he would ask, the interpretation of which would belong only to him, as he was the only person acquainted with the subject of the question. I declared myself quite willing, for it was necessary to brazen it out, after having ventured as far as I had done. He wrote the question and gave it to me. I read it. I could not understand either the subject or the meaning of the words, but it did not matter, I had to give an answer. If the question was so obscure that I could not make out the sense of it, it was natural that I should not understand the answer. I therefore answered in ordinary figures, 4 lines of which he alone could be the interpreter, not caring much, at least in appearance, how they would be understood. M. Dandolo read them twice over, seemed astonished, said it was all very plain to him, it was divine, it was unique, it was a gift from heaven, the numbers being only the vehicle, but the answer emanating evidently from an immortal spirit. M. Dandolo was so well pleased that his two friends very naturally wanted also to make an experiment. They asked questions on all sorts of subjects, and my answers, perfectly unintelligible to myself, were all held as divine by them. I congratulated them on their success, and congratulated myself in their presence upon being the possessor of a thing to which I had until then attached no importance whatsoever, but which I promised to cultivate carefully, knowing that I could thus be of some service to their excellencies. They all asked me how long I would require to teach them the rules of my sublime calculus. Not very long, I answered, and I will teach you as you wish, although the hermit assured me that I would die suddenly within 3 days if I communicated my science to anyone, but I have no faith whatever in that prediction. M. de Bragadin, who believed in it more than I did, told me in a serious tone that I was bound to have faith in it, and from that day they never asked me again to teach them. They very likely thought that, if they could attach me to them, it would answer the purpose as well as if they possessed the science themselves. Thus I became the hierophant of these 3 worthy and talented men, who, in spite of their literary accomplishments, were not wise, since they were infatuated with occult and fabulous sciences, and believed in the existence of phenomena impossible in the moral as well as in the physical order of things. They believed that through me they possessed the philosopher's stone, the universal panacea, the intercourse with all the elementary, heavenly, and infernal spirits, and they had no doubt whatever that, thanks to my sublime science, they could find out the secrets of every government in Europe. after they had assured themselves of the reality of my Kabbalistic science by questions respecting the past, they decided to turn it to some use by consulting it upon the present and upon the future. I had no difficulty in showing myself a good guesser, because I always gave answers with a double meaning, one of the meanings being carefully arranged by me, so as not to be understood until after the event. In that manner my Kabbalistic science, like the oracle of Delphi, could never be found in fault. I saw how easy it must have been for the ancient heathen priests to impose upon ignorant, and therefore credulous mankind. I saw how easy it will always be for impostors to find dupes, and I realized, even better than the Roman orator, why two augurs could never look at each other without laughing. It was because they both had an equal interest in giving importance to the deceit they perpetrated, and from which they derived such immense profits. But what I could not, and probably never shall understand, was the reason for which the fathers, who were not so simple or so ignorant as our evangelists, did not feel able to deny the divinity of oracles, and, in order to get out of the difficulty, ascribe them to the devil. They would never have entertained such a strange idea if they had been acquainted with Kabbalistic science. My three worthy friends were like holy fathers; they had intelligence and wit, but they were superstitious and no philosophers. But, although believing fully in my oracles, they were too kind-hearted to think them the work of the devil, and it suited their natural goodness better to believe my answers inspired by some heavenly spirit. They were not only good Christians and faithful to the church, but even real devotees and full of scruples. They were not married, and, after having renounced all commerce with women, they had become the enemies of the female sex, perhaps a strong proof of the weakness of their minds. They imagined that chastity was the condition sine qua non, exacted by the spirits from those who wished to have intimate communication or intercourse with them. They fancied that spirits excluded women, and vice versa. With all these oddities, the three friends were truly intelligent and even witty, and at the beginning of my acquaintance with them I could not reconcile these antagonistic points. But a prejudiced mind cannot reason well, and the faculty of reasoning is the most important of all. I often laughed when I heard them talk on religious matters. They would ridicule those whose intellectual faculties were so limited that they could not understand the mysteries of religion. The incarnation of the Word, they would say, was a trifle for God, and therefore easy to understand, and the resurrection was so comprehensible that it did not appear to them wonderful, because, as God cannot die, Jesus Christ was naturally certain to rise again. As for the Eucharist, transubstantiation, the real presence, it was all no mystery to them, but palpable evidence, and yet they were not Jesuits. They were in the habit of going to confession every week without feeling the slightest trouble about their confessors, whose ignorance they kindly regretted. They thought themselves bound to confess only what was sin in their opinion, and in that, at least, they reasoned with good sense. With those three extraordinary characters, worthy of esteem and respect for their moral qualities, their honesty, their reputation, and their age, as well as for their noble birth, I spent my days in a very pleasant manner, although in their thirst for knowledge they often kept me hard at work for 10 hours running, all four of us being locked up together in a room, and unapproachable to everybody, even to friends or relatives. I contemplated the conquest of their friendship by relating to them the whole of my life, only with some proper reserve, so as not to lead them into any capital sins. I confess candidly that I deceived them as the Papa del Demopolo used to deceive the Greeks, who applied to him for the oracles of the Virgin. I certainly did not act towards them with a true sense of honesty, but if the reader to whom I confess myself is acquainted with the world and with the spirit of society, I entreat him to think before judging me, and perhaps I may meet with some indulgence at his hands. I might be told that if I had wished to follow the rules of pure morality, I ought either to have declined intimate intercourse with them, or to have undeceived them. I cannot deny these premises, but I will answer that I was only 20 years of age. I was intelligent, talented, and had been a poor fiddler. I should have lost my time in trying to cure them of their weakness. I should not have succeeded, for they would have laughed in my face, deplored my ignorance, and the result of it all would have been my dismissal. Besides, I had no mission, no right, to constitute myself an apostle, and if I had heroically resolved on leaving them as soon as I knew them to be foolish visionaries, I should have shown myself a misanthrope, the enemy of those worthy men for whom I could procure innocent pleasures, and my own enemy at the same time, because as a young man I liked to live well, and to enjoy all the pleasures natural to youth and to a good constitution. By acting in that manner, I should have failed in common politeness. I should perhaps have caused or allowed M. de Bragadin's death, and I should have exposed those three honest men to becoming the victims of the first bold cheat, who, ministering to their monomania, might have won their favour, and would have ruined them by inducing them to undertake the chemical operations of the great work. There is also another consideration, dear reader, and as I love you, I will tell you what it is. An invincible self-love would have prevented me from declaring myself unworthy of their friendship, either by my ignorance or by my pride, and I should have been guilty of great rudeness if I had ceased to visit them. I took, at least it seemed so to me, the best, the most natural, the noblest decision, if we consider the disposition of their mind, when I decided upon the plan of conduct which ensured me the necessaries of life. And of those necessities, who could be a better judge than your very humble servant? Through the friendship of those three men, I was certain of obtaining consideration and influence in my own country. Besides, I found it very flattering to my vanity to become the subject of the speculative chattering of empty fools who, having nothing else to do, and always trying to find out the cause of every moral phenomenon they meet with, which their narrow intellect cannot understand. People racked their brain in Venice, trying to find out how my intimacy with three men of that high character could possibly exist. They were wrapped up in heavenly aspirations. I was a world's devotee. They were very strict in their morals. I was thirsty of all pleasures. At the beginning of summer, M. de Bragadin was once more able to take his seat in the Senate, and the day before he went out for the first time he spoke to me thus: "Whoever you may be, I am indebted to you for my life. Your first protectors wanted to make you a priest, a doctor, an advocate, a soldier, and ended by making a fiddler of you. Those persons did not know you. God has evidently instructed your guardian angel to bring you to me. I know you and appreciate you. If you will be my son, you have only to acknowledge me for your father, and for the future until my death. I will treat you as my own child. Your apartment is ready. You may send your clothes. You shall have a servant, a gondola at your orders, my own table, and 10 sequins a month. It is the sum I used to receive from my father when I was your age. You need not think of the future. Think only of enjoying yourself, and take me as your adviser in everything that may happen to you, in everything you may wish to undertake, and you may be certain of always finding me your friend." I threw myself at his feet to assure him of my gratitude, and embraced him, calling him my father. He folded me in his arms, called me his dear son. I promised to love him and to obey him. His two friends, who lived in the same palace, embraced me affectionately, and we swore eternal fraternity. Such is the history of my metamorphosis, and of the lucky stroke which, taking me from the vile profession of a fiddler, raised me to the rank of a grandee. End of chapter 17.
Chapter 18, Part 1 of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1 by Giacomo Casanova. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Voice Guy. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, The Venetian Years by Giacomo Casanova, Episode 4, Return to Venice, Chapter 18, Part 1. Fortune, which had taken pleasure in giving me a specimen of its despotic caprice, and had ensured my happiness through means which sages would disavow, had not the power to make me adopt a system of moderation and prudence which alone could establish my future welfare on a firm basis. At the house of Madame Avogadro, a woman full of wit in spite of her 60 years, I made the acquaintance of a young Polish nobleman called Zawoyski. He was expecting money from Poland, but in the meantime the Venetian ladies did not let him want for any, being all very much in love with his handsome face and his Polish manners. We soon became good friends. My purse was his, but 20 years later he assisted me to a far greater extent in Munich. Zawoyski was honest. He had only a small dose of intelligence, but it was enough for his happiness. He died in Trieste 5 or 6 years ago, the ambassador of the Elector of Treves. I will speak of him in another part of these memoirs. This amiable young man, who was a favorite with everybody, and was thought a free thinker because he frequented the society of Angelo Carini and Leonardo Venier, presented me one day, as we were out walking, to an unknown countess who took my fancy very strongly. We called on her in the evening, and after introducing me to her husband, Count Rinaldi, she invited us to remain and have supper. The Count made a faro bank in the course of the evening. I punted with his wife as a partner, and won some 50 ducats. Very much pleased with my new acquaintance, I called alone on the Countess the next morning. The Count, apologizing for his wife who was not up yet, took me to her room. She received me with graceful ease, and her husband having left us alone, she had the art to let me hope for every favor, yet without committing herself. When I took leave of her, she invited me to supper for the evening. After supper I played, still in partnership with her, won again, and went away very much in love. I did not fail to pay her another visit the next morning, but when I presented myself at the house, I was told that she had gone out. I called again in the evening, and after she had excused herself for not having been at home in the morning, the faro bank began, and I lost all my money, still having the Countess for my partner. After supper, and when the other guests had retired, I remained with Zawoyski, Count Rinaldi having offered to give us our revenge. As I had no more money, I played upon trust, and the Count threw down the cards after I had lost 500 sequins. I went away in great sorrow. I was bound in honor to pay the next morning, and I did not possess a groat. Love increased my despair, for I saw myself on the point of losing the esteem of a woman by whom I was smitten, and the anxiety I felt did not escape Monsieur de Bragadin when we met in the morning. He kindly encouraged me to confess my troubles to him. I was conscious that it was my only chance, and candidly related the whole affair, and I ended by saying that I should not survive my disgrace. He consoled me by promising that my debt would be cancelled in the course of the day if I would swear never to play again upon trust. I took an oath to that effect, and kissing his hand I went out for a walk, relieved from a great load. I had no doubt that my excellent father would give me 500 sequins during the day, and I enjoyed my anticipation the honor I would derive, in the opinion of the lovely Countess, by my exactitude and prompt discharge of my debt. I felt that it gave new strength to my hopes, and that feeling prevented me from regretting my heavy loss, but grateful for the great generosity of my benefactor, I was fully determined on keeping my promise. I dined with the 3 friends, and the matter was not even alluded to. But as we were rising from the table, a servant brought Monsieur de Bragadin a letter and a parcel. He read the letter, asked me to follow him into his study, and the moment we were alone, he said, "Here is a parcel for you." I opened it, and found some 40 sequins. Seeing my surprise, Monsieur de Bragadin laughed merrily and handed me the letter, the contents of which ran thus: "Monsieur de Casanova may be sure that our playing last night was only a joke. He owes me nothing. My wife begs to send him half of the gold which he has lost in cash. Count Rinaldi." I looked at Monsieur de Bragadin, perfectly amazed, and he burst out laughing. I guessed the truth, thanked him, and embracing him tenderly, I promised to be wiser for the future. The mist I had before my eyes was dispelled. I felt that my love was defunct, and I remained rather ashamed when I realized that I had been the dupe of the wife as well as of the husband. "This evening," said my clever physician, "you can have a gay supper with the charming countess. This evening, my dear respected benefactor, I will have supper with you. You have given me a masterly lesson. The next time you lose money upon trust, you had better not pay it." "But I should be dishonored." "Never mind. The sooner you dishonor yourself, the more you will save, for you will always be compelled to accept your dishonor whenever you find yourself utterly unable to pay your losses. It is therefore more prudent not to wait until then. It is much better still to avoid that fatal impossibility by never playing otherwise than with money in hand. No doubt of it, for then you will save both your honor and your purse. But as you are fond of games of chance, I advise you never to punt. Make the bank, and the advantage must be on your side. Yes, but only a slight advantage. As slight as you please, but it will be on your side, and when the game is over, you will find yourself a winner and not a loser. The punter is excited, the banker is calm. The last says, "I bet you do not guess," while the first says, "I bet I can guess." Which is the fool, and which is the wise man? The question is easily answered. I adjure you to be prudent, but if you should punt and win, recollect that you are only an idiot if at the end you lose. "Why an idiot? Fortune is very fickle." It must be necessarily so. It is a natural consequence. Leave off playing, believe me, the very moment you see luck turning, even if you should, at that moment, win but one groat. I had read Plato, and I was astonished at finding a man who could reason like Socrates. The next day, Zawoyski called on me very early to tell me that I had been expected to supper, and that Count Rinaldi had praised my promptness in paying my debts of honor. I did not think it necessary to undeceive him, but I did not go again to Count Rinaldi's, whom I saw 16 years afterwards in Milan. As to Zawoyski, I did not tell him the story till I met him in Carlsbad, old and deaf, 40 years later. 3 or 4 months later, Monsieur de Bragadin taught me another of his masterly lessons. I had become acquainted, through Zawoyski, with a Frenchman called Labadie, who was then soliciting from the Venetian government the appointment of Inspector of the Armies of the Republic. The Senate appointed, and I presented him to my protector, who promised him his vote. But the circumstance I am going to relate prevented him from fulfilling his promise. I was in need of 100 sequins to discharge a few debts, and I begged Monsieur de Bragadin to give them to me. "Why, my dear son, do you not ask Monsieur de Labadie to render you that service?" "I should not dare to do so, dear father." "Try him. I am certain that he will be glad to lend you that sum." "I doubt it, but I will try." I called upon Labadie on the following day, and after a short exchange of compliments, I told him the service I expected from his friendship. He excused himself in a very polite manner, drowning his refusal in that sea of commonplaces which people are sure to repeat when they cannot or will not oblige a friend. Zawoyski came in as he was still apologizing, and I left them together. I hurried at once to Monsieur de Bragadin, and told him my want of success. He merely remarked that the Frenchman was deficient in intelligence. It just happened that it was the very day on which the appointment of the inspectorship was to be brought before the Senate. I went out to attend to my business, I ought to say to my pleasure, and as I did not return home till after midnight, I went to bed without seeing my father. In the morning I said in his presence that I intended to call upon Labadie to congratulate him upon his appointment. "You may spare yourself that trouble. The Senate has rejected his nomination." "How so?" 3 days ago Labadie felt sure of his success." "He was right then, for he would have been appointed if I had not made up my mind to speak against him. I have proved to the Senate that a right policy forbade the government to trust such an important post to a foreigner." "I am much surprised, for your Excellency was not of that opinion the day before yesterday." "Very true, but then I did not know Monsieur de Labadie. I found out only yesterday that the man was not sufficiently intelligent to fill the position he was soliciting. Is he likely to possess a sane judgment when he refuses to lend you 100 sequins? That refusal has cost him an important appointment and an income of 3,000 crowns, which would now be his. When I was taking my walk on the same day, I met Zawoyski with Labadie and did not try to avoid them. Labadie was furious, and he had some reason to be so. "If you had told me," he said angrily, "that the 100 sequins were intended as a gag to stop Monsieur de Bragadin's mouth, I would have contrived to procure them for you. If you had an inspector's brains, you would have easily guessed it." The Frenchman's resentment proved very useful to me, because he related the circumstance to everybody. The result was that from that time, those who wanted the patronage of the senator applied to me. Comment is needless. This sort of thing has long been in existence, and will long remain so, because very often, to obtain the highest of favors, all that is necessary is to obtain the goodwill of a minister's favorite, or even of his valet. It was about that time that my brother Jean came to Venice with Guarienti, a converted Jew, a great judge of paintings, who was traveling at the expense of His Majesty the King of Poland and the Elector of Saxony. It was the converted Jew who had purchased for His Majesty the gallery of the Duke of Modena for 100,000 sequins. Guarienti and my brother left Venice for Rome, where Jean remained in the studio of the celebrated painter Raphael Mengs, whom we shall meet again hereafter. Now, as a faithful historian, I must give my readers the story of a certain adventure in which were involved the honor and happiness of one of the most charming women in Italy, who would have been unhappy if I had not been a thoughtless fellow. In the early part of October 1746, the theaters being opened, I was walking about with my mask on, when I perceived a woman, whose head was well enveloped in the hood of her mantle, getting out of the Ferrara barge, which had just arrived. Seeing her alone, and observing her uncertain walk, I felt myself drawn towards her, as if an unseen hand had guided me. I came up to her, and offered my services if I can be of any use to her. She answers timidly that she only wants to make some inquiries. "We're not here in the right place for conversation," I say to her, "but if you would be kind enough to come with me to a cafe, you would be able to speak and explain your wishes." She hesitates. I insist, and she gives way. The tavern was close at hand. We go in, and we are alone in a private room. I take off my mask, and out of politeness she must put down the hood of her mantle. A large muslin headdress conceals half of her face, but her eyes, her nose, and her pretty mouth are enough to let me see on her features beauty, nobleness, sorrow, and that candor which gives youth such an undefinable charm. I need not say that, with such a good letter of introduction, the unknown at once captivated my warmest interest. After wiping away a few tears which are flowing in spite of all her efforts, she tells me that she belongs to a noble family, and that she has run away from her father's house, alone, trusting in God, to meet a Venetian nobleman who had seduced her and then deceived her, thus sealing her everlasting misery. You have then some hope of recalling him to the path of duty? I suppose he has promised you marriage? He has engaged his faith to me in writing. The only favor I claim from your kindness is to take me to his house, to leave me there, and to keep my secret. You may trust, madam, to the feelings of a man of honor. I am worthy of your trust. Have entire confidence in me, for I already take a deep interest in all your concerns. Tell me his name. Alas, sir, I give way to fate. With these words, she takes out of her bosom a paper which she gives me. I recognize the handwriting of Zanetto Stefani. It was a promise of marriage by which he engaged his word of honor to marry within a week in Venice the young Countess A.S. When I have read the paper, I return it to her, saying that I knew the writer quite well, that he was connected with the Chancellor's office, known as a great libertine, and deeply in debt, but that he would be rich after his mother's death. For God's sake, take me to his house. I will do anything you wish, but have entire confidence in me, and be good enough to hear me. I advise you not to go to his house. He's already done you great injury, and even supposing that you should happen to find him at home, he might be capable of receiving you badly. If he should not be at home, it is most likely that his mother would not exactly welcome you if you should tell her who you are and what is your errand. Trust to me, and be quite certain that God has sent me on your way to assist you. I promise you that tomorrow at the latest you shall know whether Stefani is in Venice, what he intends to do with you, and what we may compel him to do. Until then, my advice is not to let him know your arrival in Venice." "Good God! Where shall I go tonight?" "To a respectable house, of course." "I will go to yours if you are married." "I am a bachelor." I knew an honest widow who resided in a lane, and who had 2 furnished rooms. I persuade the young countess to follow me, and we take a gondola. As we are gliding along, she tells me that 1 month before Steffani had stopped in her neighborhood for necessary repairs to his traveling carriage, and that on the same day he made her acquaintance at a house where she had gone with her mother for the purpose of offering their congratulations to a newly married lady. "I was unfortunate enough," she continued, "to inspire him with love, and he postponed his departure. He remained 1 month in C, never going out but in the evening, and spending every night under my windows conversing with me. He swore 1,000 times that he adored me, that his intentions were honorable. I entreated him to present himself to my parents to ask me in marriage, but he always excused himself by alleging some reason, good or bad, assuring me that he could not be happy unless I showed him entire confidence. He would beg of me to make up my mind to run away with him, unknown to everybody, promising that my honor should not suffer from such a step because 3 days after my departure everybody should receive notice of my being his wife, and he assured me that he would bring me back on a visit to my native place shortly after our marriage. Alas, sir, what shall I say now? Love blinded me. I fell into the abyss. I believed him. I agreed to everything. He gave me the paper which you have read, and the following night I allowed him to come into my room through the window under which he was in the habit of conversing with me. I consented to be guilty of a crime which I believed would be atoned for within 3 days, and he left me, promising that the next night he would be again under my window, ready to receive me in his arms. Could I possibly entertain any doubt after the fearful crime I had committed for him? I prepared a small parcel, and waited for his coming, but in vain. Oh, what a cruel long night it was! In the morning I heard that the monster had gone away with his servant 1 hour after sealing my shame. You may imagine my despair. I adopted the only plan that despair could suggest, and that, of course, was not the right one. 1 hour before midnight I left my father's roof alone, thus completing my dishonor, but resolved on death if the man who has cruelly robbed me of my most precious treasure, and whom a natural instinct told me I could find here, does not restore me the honor which he alone can give me back. I walked all night and nearly the whole day without taking any food until I got into the barge, which brought me here in 24 hours. I traveled in the boat with 5 men and 2 women, but no one saw my face or heard my voice. I kept constantly sitting down in a corner, holding my head down, half asleep, and with this prayer book in my hands. I was left alone. No one spoke to me, and I thanked God for it. When I landed on the wharf, you did not give me time to think how I could find out the dwelling of my perfidious seducer, but you may imagine the impression produced upon me by the sudden apparition of a masked man who, abruptly and as if placed there purposely by Providence, offered me his services. It seemed to me that you had guessed my distress, and far from experiencing any repugnance, I felt that I was acting rightly in trusting myself in your hands, in spite of all prudence which, perhaps, ought to have made me turn a deaf ear to your words, and refuse the invitation to enter alone with you the house to which you took me. You know all now, sir, but I entreat you not to judge me too severely. I have been virtuous all through my life. 1 month ago I had never committed a fault which could call a blush upon my face, and the bitter tears which I shed every day will, I hope, wash out my crime in the eyes of God. I have been carefully brought up, but love and the want of experience have thrown me into the abyss. I am in your hands, and I feel certain that I shall have no cause to repent it. I needed all she had just told me to confirm me in the interest which I had felt in her from the first moment. I told her unsparingly that Steffani had seduced and abandoned her of malice aforethought, and that she ought to think of him only to be revenged of his perfidy. My words made her shudder, and she buried her beautiful face in her hands. We reached the widow's house. I established her in a pretty, comfortable room, and ordered some supper for her, desiring the good landlady to shew her every attention and let her want for nothing. I then took an affectionate leave of her, promising to see her early in the morning. On leaving this interesting but hapless girl, I proceeded to the house of Steffani. I heard from one of his mother's gondoliers that he had returned to Venice 3 days before, but that 24 hours after his return he had gone away again without any servant, and nobody knew his whereabouts, not even his mother. The same evening, happening to be seated next to an abbé from Bologna at the theater, I asked him several questions respecting the family of my unfortunate protégé. The abbé being intimately acquainted with them, I gathered from him all the information I required, and amongst other things I heard that the young countess had a brother, then an officer in the papal service. Very early the next morning I called upon her. She was still asleep. The widow told me that she had made a pretty good supper, but without speaking a single word, and that she had locked herself up in her room immediately afterwards. As soon as she had opened her door, I entered her room, and cutting short her apologies for having kept me waiting, I informed her of all I had heard. Her features bore the stamp of deep sorrow, but she looked calmer, and her complexion was no longer pale. She thought it unlikely that Steffani would have left for any place but for sea. Admitting the possibility that she might be right, I immediately offered to go to sea myself, and to return without loss of time to fetch her in case Steffani should be there. Without giving her time to answer, I told her all the particulars I had learned concerning her honorable family, which caused her real satisfaction. "I have no objection," she said, "to your going to sea, and I thank you for the generosity of your offer, but I beg you will postpone your journey. I still hope that Steffani will return, and then I can take a decision." "I think you are quite right," I said. "Will you allow me to have some breakfast with you?" "Do you suppose I could refuse you?" "I should be very sorry to disturb you in any way. How did you used to amuse yourself at home?" "I'm very fond of books and music. My harpsichord was my delight." I left her after breakfast, and in the evening I came back with a basket full of good books and music, and I sent her an excellent harpsichord. My kindness confused her, but I surprised her much more when I took out of my pocket 3 pairs of slippers. She blushed and thanked me with great feeling. She had walked a long distance, her shoes were evidently worn out, her feet sore, and she appreciated the delicacy of my present. As I had no improper design with regard to her, I enjoyed her gratitude, and felt pleased at the idea she evidently entertained of my kind attentions. I had no other purpose in view but to restore calm to her mind, and to obliterate the bad opinion which the unworthy Steffani had given her of men in general. I never thought of inspiring her with love for me, and I had not the slightest idea that I could fall in love with her. She was unhappy, and her unhappiness, a sacred thing in my eyes, called all the more for my honorable sympathy because, without knowing me, she had given me her entire confidence. Situated as she was, I could not suppose her heart susceptible of harboring a new affection, and I would have despised myself if I had tried to seduce her by any means in my power. I remained with her only a quarter of an hour, being unwilling that my presence should trouble her at such a moment, as she seemed to be at a loss how to thank me and express all her gratitude. I was thus engaged in a rather delicate adventure, the end of which I could not possibly foresee, but my warmth for my protégée did not cool down, and having no difficulty in procuring the means to keep her, I had no wish to see the last scene of the romance. That singular meeting, which gave me the useful opportunity of finding myself endowed with generous dispositions, stronger even than my love for pleasure, flattered my self-love more than I could express. I was then trying a great experiment, and conscious that I wanted sadly to study myself, I gave up all my energies to acquire the great science of the X. On the 3rd day, in the midst of expressions of gratitude which I could not succeed in stopping, she told me that she could not conceive why I showed her so much sympathy, because I ought to have formed but a poor opinion of her in consequence of the readiness with which she had followed me into the café. She smiled when I answered that I could not understand how I had succeeded in giving her so great a confidence in my virtue, when I appeared before her with a mask on my face, in a costume which did not indicate a very virtuous character. "It was easy for me, madam," I continued, "to guess that you were a beauty in distress, when I observed your youth, the nobleness of your countenance, and more than all, your candor. The stamp of truth was so well affixed to the first words you uttered that I could not have the shadow of a doubt left in me as to your being the unhappy victim of the most natural of all feelings, and as to your having abandoned your home through a sentiment of honor. Your fault was that of a warm heart, seduced by love, over which reason could have no sway, and your flight, the action of a soul crying for reparation or for revenge, fully justifies you. Your cowardly seducer must pay with his life the penalty due to his crime, and he ought never to receive by marrying you an unjust reward, for he is not worthy of possessing you after degrading himself by the vilest conduct. Everything you say is true. My brother, I hope, will avenge me. You are greatly mistaken if you imagine that Steffani will fight your brother. Steffani is a coward who will never expose himself to an honorable death. As I was speaking, she put her hand in her pocket and drew forth, after a few moments' consideration, a stiletto 6 inches long, which she placed on the table. "What is this?" I exclaimed. "It is a weapon upon which I reckoned until now to use against myself in case I should not succeed in obtaining reparation for the crime I have committed. But you have opened my eyes. Take away, I entreat you, this stiletto, which henceforth is useless to me. I trust in your friendship, and I have an inward certainty that I shall be indebted to you for my honor as well as for my life." I was struck by the words she had just uttered, and I felt that those words, as well as her looks, had found their way to my heart, besides enlisting my generous sympathy. I took the stiletto, and left her with so much agitation that I had to acknowledge the weakness of my heroism, which I was very near turning into ridicule. Yet I had the wonderful strength to perform, at least by halves, the character of a Cato until the 7th day. I must explain how a certain suspicion of the young lady arose in my mind. That doubt was heavy on my heart, for, if it had proved true, I should have been a dupe, and the idea was humiliating. She had told me that she was a musician. I had immediately sent her a harpsichord, and yet, although the instrument had been at her disposal for 3 days, she had not opened it once, for the widow had told me so. It seemed to me that the best way to thank me for my attentive kindness would have been to give me a specimen of her musical talent. Had she deceived me? If so, she would lose my esteem. But unwilling to form a hasty judgment, I kept on my guard, with a firm determination to make good use of the first opportunity that might present itself to clear up my doubts. I called upon her the next day after dinner, which was not my usual time, having resolved on creating the opportunity myself. I caught her seated before a toilet glass, while the widow dressed the most beautiful auburn hair I had ever seen. I tendered my apologies for my sudden appearance at an unusual hour. She excused herself for not having completed her toilet, and the widow went on with her work. It was the first time I had seen the whole of her face, her neck, and half of her arms, which the Graces themselves had molded. I remained in silent contemplation. I praised, quite by chance, the perfume of the pomatum, and the widow took the opportunity of telling her that she had spent in combs, powder, and pomatum the 3 livres she had received from her. I recollected that she had told me the first day that she had left C with 10 paoli. I blushed for very shame, for I ought to have thought of that. As soon as the widow had dressed her hair, she left the room to prepare some coffee for us. I took up a ring which had been laid by her on the toilet table, and I saw that it contained a portrait exactly like her. I was amused at the singular fancy she had of having her likeness taken in a man's costume, with black hair. "You are mistaken," she said. "It is a portrait of my brother. He is 2 years older than I, and is an officer in the papal army." I begged her permission to put the ring on her finger. She consented, and when I tried, out of mere gallantry, to kiss her hand, she drew it back, blushing. I fear she might be offended, and I assured her of my respect. "Ah, sir," she answered, "in the situation in which I am placed, I must think of defending myself against my own self, much more than against you." The compliment struck me as so fine and so complimentary to me that I thought it better not to take it up. But she could easily read in my eyes that she would never find me ungrateful for whatever feelings she might entertain in my favor. Yet I felt my love taking such proportions that I did not know how to keep it a mystery any longer. Soon after that, as she was again thanking me for the books I had given her, saying that I had guessed her taste exactly because she did not like novels. She added, "I owe you an apology for not having sung to you yet, knowing that you are fond of music." These words made me breathe freely. Without waiting for any answer, she sat down before the instrument and played several pieces with facility, with a precision, with an expression of which no words can convey any idea. I was in ecstasy. I entreated her to sing. After some little ceremony, she took one of the music books I had given her, and she sang at sight in a manner which fairly ravished me. I begged that she would allow me to kiss her hand, and she did not say yes, but when I took it and pressed my lips on it, she did not oppose any resistance. I had the courage to smother my ardent desires, and the kiss I imprinted on her lovely hand was a mixture of tenderness, respect, and admiration. I took leave of her, smitten, full of love, and almost determined on declaring my passion. Reserve becomes silliness when we know that our affection is returned by the woman we love, but as yet I was not quite sure. End of Chapter 18, Part 1.
Chapter 18, Part 2 of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, by Giacomo Casanova. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Lincoln Brooks. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, The Venetian Years, by Giacomo Casanova. Episode 4, Return to Venice. Chapter 18, Part 2. The disappearance of Stefani was the talk of Venice, but I did not inform the charming Countess of that circumstance. It was generally supposed that his mother had refused to pay his debts and that he had run away to avoid his creditors. It was very possible, but whether he returned or not, I could not make up my mind to lose the precious treasure I had in my hands. Yet I did not see in what manner, in what quality, I could enjoy that treasure, and I found myself in a regular maze. Sometimes I had an idea of consulting my kind father, but I would soon abandon it with fear, for I had made a trial of his empiric treatment in the Rinaldi affair, and still more in the case of Labadie. His remedies frightened me to that extent that I would rather remain ill than be cured by their means. One morning, I was foolish enough to inquire from the widow whether the lady had asked her who I was. What an egregious blunder! I saw it when the good woman, instead of answering me, said, "Does she not know who you are?" "Answer me, and do not ask questions," I said, in order to hide my confusion. The worthy woman was right. Through my stupidity she would now feel curious. The tittle-tattle of the neighborhood would of course take up the affair and discuss it, and all through my thoughtlessness. It was an unpardonable blunder. One ought never to be more careful than in addressing questions to half-educated persons. During the fortnight that she had passed under my protection, the Countess had shown me no curiosity whatever to know anything about me, but it did not prove that she was not curious on the subject. If I had been wise, I should have told her the very first day who I was, but I made up for my mistake that evening better than anybody else could have done it, and after having told her all about myself, I entreated her forgiveness for not having done so sooner. Thanking me for my confidence, she confessed how curious she had been to know me better, and she assured me that she would never have been imprudent enough to ask any questions about me from her landlady. Women have a more delicate, a surer tact than men, and her last words were a home thrust for me. Our conversation having turned to the extraordinary absence of Stefani, She said that her father must necessarily believe her to be hiding with him somewhere. He must have found out, she added, that I was in the habit of conversing with him every night from my window, and he must have heard of my having embarked for Venice on board the Ferrara barge. I feel certain that my father is now in Venice, making secretly every effort to discover me. When he visits this city, he always puts up at Bon Cousin. Will you ascertain whether he is there?" She never pronounced Stefani's name without disgust and hatred, and she said she would bury herself in a convent, far away from her native place where no one could be acquainted with her shameful history. I intended to make some inquiries the next day, but it was not necessary for me to do so, for in the evening at supper-time Monsieur Barbaro said to us, "A nobleman, a subject of the Pope, has been recommended to me and wishes me to assist him with my influence in a rather delicate and intricate matter. One of our citizens has, it appears, carried off his daughter and has been hiding somewhere with her for the last fortnight, but nobody knows where. The affair ought to be brought before the Council of 10, but the mother of the ravisher claims to be a relative of mine, and I do not intend to interfere." I pretended to take no interest in Monsieur Barbaro's words, and early the next morning I went to the young Countess to tell her the interesting news. She was still asleep, but being in a hurry, I sent the widow to say that I wanted to see her only for 2 minutes in order to communicate something of great importance. She received me, covering herself up to the chin with the bedclothes. As soon as I had informed her of all I knew, she entreated me to enlist Monsieur Barbaro as a mediator between herself and her father, assuring me that she would rather die than become the wife of the monster who had dishonored her. I undertook to do it, and she gave me the promise of marriage used by the deceiver to seduce her, so that it could be shown to her father. In order to obtain Monsieur Barbaro's mediation in favor of the young Countess, it would have been necessary to tell him that she was under my protection, and I felt it would injure my protégée. I took no determination at first, and most likely one of the reasons for my hesitation was that I saw myself on the point of losing her, which was particularly repugnant to my feelings. After dinner, Count A.S. was announced as wishing to see Monsieur Barbaro. He came in with his son, the living portrait of his sister. Monsieur Barbaro took them to his study to talk the matter over, and within an hour they had taken leave. As soon as they had gone, the excellent Monsieur Barbaro asked me, as I had expected, to consult my heavenly spirit, and to ascertain whether he would be right in interfering in favor of Count A.S. He wrote the question himself, and I gave the following answer with the utmost coolness. "You ought to interfere, but only to advise the father to forgive his daughter, and to give up all idea of compelling her to marry her ravisher, for Stefani has been sentenced to death by the will of God." The answer seemed wonderful to the three friends, and I was myself surprised at my boldness. But I had a foreboding that Stefani was to meet his death at the hands of somebody. Love might have given birth to that presentiment. Monsieur de Bragadin, who believed my oracle infallible, observed that it had never given such a clear answer, and that Stefani was certainly dead. He said to Monsieur de Barbaro, "You had better invite the Count and his son to dinner here tomorrow. You must act slowly and prudently. It would be necessary to know where the daughter is before you endeavor to make the father forgive her." Monsieur Barbaro very nearly made me drop my serious countenance by telling me that if I would try my oracle, I could let them know at once where the girl was. I answered that I would certainly ask my spirit on the morrow, thus gaining time in order to ascertain beforehand the disposition of the father and the son. But I could not help laughing, for I had placed myself under the necessity of sending Stefani to the next world, if the reputation of my oracle was to be maintained. I spent the evening with the young countess, who entertained no doubt either of her father's indulgence or of the entire confidence she could repose in me. What delight the charming girl experienced when she heard that I would dine the next day with her father and brother, and that I would tell her every word that would be said about her. But what happiness it was for me to see her convinced that she was right in loving me, and that, without me, she would certainly have been lost in a town where the policy of the government tolerates debauchery as a solitary species of individual freedom. We congratulated each other upon our fortuitous meeting and upon the conformity in our tastes, which we thought truly wonderful. We were greatly pleased that her easy acceptance of my invitation, or my promptness in persuading her to follow and to trust me, could not be ascribed to the mutual attraction of our features, for I was masked, and her hood was then as good as a mask. We entertained no doubt that everything had been arranged by heaven to get us acquainted, and to fire us both, even unknown to ourselves, with love for each other. "Confess," I said to her in a moment of enthusiasm, and as I was covering her hand with kisses, "confess that if you found me to be in love with you, you would fear me." "Alas, my only fear is to lose you." That confession, the truth of which was made evident by her voice and by her looks, proved the electric spark which ignited the latent fire. Folding her rapidly in my arms, pressing my mouth on her lips, reading in her beautiful eyes neither a proud indignation nor the cold compliance which might have been the result of a fear of losing me, I gave way entirely to the sweet inclination of love, and, swimming already in a sea of delights, I felt my enjoyment increased 100-fold when I saw, on the countenance of the beloved creature who shared it, the expression of happiness, of love, of modesty, and of sensibility, which enhances the charm of the greatest triumph. She had scarcely recovered her composure when she cast her eyes down and sighed deeply. Thinking that I knew the cause of it, I threw myself on my knees before her, and speaking to her words of the warmest affection, I begged, I entreated her to forgive me. "What offense have I to forgive you for, dear friend? You have not rightly interpreted my thoughts. Your love caused me to think of my happiness, and in that moment a cruel recollection drew that sigh from me. Pray, rise from your knees." Midnight had struck already. I told her that her good fame made it necessary for me to go away. I put my mask on and left the house. I was so surprised, so amazed at having obtained a felicity of which I did not think myself worthy, that my departure must have appeared rather abrupt to her. I could not sleep. I passed one of those disturbed nights during which the imagination of an amorous young man is unceasingly running after the shadows of reality. I had tasted, but not savored, that happy reality, and all my being was longing for her, who alone could make my enjoyment complete. In that nocturnal drama, love and imagination were the two principal actors. Hope, in the background, performed only a dumb part. People may say what they please on that subject, but hope is in fact nothing but a deceitful flatterer, accepted by reason only because it is often in need of palliatives. Happy are those men who, to enjoy life to its fullest extent, require neither hope nor foresight. In the morning, recollecting the sentence of death which I had passed on Stefani, I felt somewhat embarrassed about it. I wished I could have recalled it, as well for the honor of my oracle, which was seriously implicated by it, as for the sake of Steffani himself, whom I did not hate half so much, since I was indebted to him for the treasure in my possession. The Count and his son came to dinner. The father was simple, artless, and unceremonious. It was easy to read on his countenance the grief he felt at the unpleasant adventure of his daughter, and his anxiety to settle the affair honorably. But no anger could be traced on his features, or in his manners. The son, as handsome as the god of love, had wit and great nobility of manner. His easy, unaffected carriage pleased me, and wishing to win his friendship, I showed him every attention. After the dessert, Monsieur Barbaro contrived to persuade the Count that we were 4 persons with but one head and one heart, and the worthy nobleman spoke to us without any reserve. He praised his daughter very highly. He assured us that Steffani had never entered his house, and therefore he could not conceive by what spell, speaking to his daughter only at night and from the street under the window, he had succeeded in seducing her to such an extent as to make her leave her home alone, on foot, 2 days after he had left himself in his post-chaise. Then, observed Monsieur Barbaro, it is impossible to be certain that he actually seduced her, or to prove that she went off with him. Very true, sir, but although it cannot be proved, there is no doubt of it. And now that no one knows where Steffani is, he can be nowhere but with her. I only want him to marry her. It strikes me that it would be better not to insist upon a compulsory marriage, which would seal your daughter's misery, for Steffani is, in every respect, one of the most worthless young men we have amongst our government clerks. Were I in your place, said Monsieur de Bragadin, I would let my daughter's repentance disarm my anger, and I would forgive her. Where is she? I am ready to fold her in my arms, but how can I believe in her repentance when it is evident that she is still with him? Is it quite certain that in leaving C. she proceeded to this city? I have it from the master of the barge himself, and she landed within 20 yards of the Roman gate. An individual, wearing a mask, was waiting for her, joined her at once, and they both disappeared without leaving any trace of their whereabouts. Very likely it was Steffani there waiting for her. No, for he is short, and the man with the mask was tall. Besides, I have heard that Steffani left Venice 2 days before the arrival of my daughter. The man must have been some friend of Steffani, and he has taken her to him. But, my dear Count, all this is mere supposition. There are 4 persons who have seen the man with the mask and pretend to know him, only they do not agree. Here is a list of 4 names, and I will accuse these 4 persons before the Council of 10, if Steffani should deny having my daughter in his possession. The list, which he handed to Monsieur Barbaro, gave not only the names of the 4 accused persons, but likewise those of their accusers. The last name, which Monsieur Barbaro read, was mine. When I heard it, I shrugged my shoulders in a manner which caused the 3 friends to laugh heartily. Monsieur de Bragadin, seeing the surprise of the Count at such uncalled-for mirth, said to him, This is Casanova, my son, and I give you my word of honor that if your daughter is in his hands, she is perfectly safe. Although he may not look exactly the sort of man to whom young girls should be trusted. The surprise, the amazement, and the perplexity of the Count and his son were an amusing picture. The loving father begged me to excuse him, with tears in his eyes, telling me to place myself in his position. My only answer was to embrace him most affectionately. The man who had recognized me was a noted pimp whom I had thrashed some time before for having deceived me. If I had not been there just in time to take care of the young countess, she would not have escaped him, and he would have ruined her forever by taking her to some house of ill fame. The result of the meeting was that the Count agreed to postpone his application to the Council of 10 until Steffani's place of refuge should be discovered. "I have not seen Steffani for 6 months, sir," I said to the Count, "but I promise you to kill him in a duel as soon as he returns." "You shall not do it," answered the young Count very coolly, "unless he kills me first." "Gentlemen," exclaimed Monsieur de Bragadin, "I can assure you that you will neither of you fight a duel with him, for Steffani is dead." "Dead?" said the Count. "We must not," observed the prudent Barbaro, "take that word in its literal sense, but the wretched man is dead to all honor and self-respect." After that truly dramatic scene, during which I could guess the denouement of the play was near at hand, I went to my charming Countess, taking care to change my gondola 3 times, a necessary precaution to baffle spies. I gave my anxious mistress an exact account of all the conversation. She was very impatient for my coming, and wept tears of joy when I repeated her father's words of forgiveness. But when I told her that nobody knew of Steffani having entered her chamber, she fell on her knees and thanked God. I then repeated her brother's words, imitating his coolness. "You shall not kill him unless he kills me first." She kissed me tenderly, calling me her guardian angel, her savior, and weeping in my arms. I promised to bring her brother on the following day, or the day after that, at the latest. We had our supper, but we did not talk of Steffani or of revenge, and after that pleasant meal we devoted 2 hours to the worship of the God of love. I left her at midnight, promising to return early in the morning. My reason for not remaining all night with her was that the landlady might, if necessary, swear without scruple that I had never spent a night with the young girl. It proved a very lucky inspiration of mine, for when I arrived home, I found the 3 friends waiting impatiently for me in order to impart to me wonderful news which Monsieur de Bragadin had heard at the sitting of the Senate. "Steffani," said Monsieur de Bragadin to me, "is dead, as our angel Paralis revealed it to us. He is dead to the world, for he has become a Capuchin friar. The Senate, as a matter of course, has been informed of it. We alone are aware that it is a punishment which God has visited upon him. Let us worship the author of all things and the heavenly hierarchy which renders us worthy of knowing what remains a mystery to all men. Now we must achieve our undertaking and console the poor father. We must inquire from Paralis where the girl is. She cannot now be with Steffani. Of course God has not condemned her to be a Capuchin nun. I need not consult my angel, dearest father, for it is by his express orders that I have been compelled until now to make a mystery of the refuge found by the young countess." I related the whole story, except what they had no business to know, for, in the opinion of the worthy men who had paid heavy tribute to love, all intrigues were fearful crimes. Monsieur Dandolo and Monsieur Barbaro expressed their surprise when they heard that the young girl had been under my protection for a fortnight. But Monsieur de Bragadin said that he was not astonished, that it was according to Kabbalistic science, and that he knew it. "We must only," he added, "keep up the mystery of his daughter's place of refuge for the Count, until we know for a certainty that he will forgive her, and that he will take her with him to C, or to any other place where he may wish to live hereafter." "He cannot refuse to forgive her," I said. when he finds that the amiable girl would never have left C if her seducer had not given her this promise of marriage in his own handwriting. She walked as far as the barge, and she landed at the very moment I was passing the Roman gate. An inspiration from above told me to accost her and to invite her to follow me. She obeyed as if she was fulfilling the decree of heaven. I took her to a refuge impossible to discover and placed her under the care of a God-fearing woman. My 3 friends listened to me so attentively that they looked like 3 statues. I advised them to invite the Count to dinner for the day after next, because I needed some time to consult Paralis de modo tenendi. I then told Monsieur Barbaro to let the Count know in what sense he was to understand Steffani's death. He undertook to do it, and we retired to rest. I slept only 4 or 5 hours, and dressing myself quickly, hurried to my beloved mistress. I told the widow not to serve the coffee until we called for it, because we wanted to remain quiet and undisturbed for some hours, having several important letters to write. I found the lovely Countess in bed, but awake, and her eyes beaming with happiness and contentment. For a fortnight I had only seen her sad, melancholy, and thoughtful. Her pleased countenance, which I naturally ascribed to my influence, filled me with joy. We commenced, as all happy lovers always do, and we were both unsparing of the mutual proofs of our love, tenderness, and gratitude. After our delightful amorous sport, I told her the news, but love had so completely taken possession of her pure and sensitive soul that what had been important was now only an accessory. But the news of her seducer having turned a Capuchin friar filled her with amazement, and, passing very sensible remarks on the extraordinary event, she pitied Steffani. When we can feel pity, we love no longer, but a feeling of pity succeeding love is the characteristic only of a great and generous mind. She was much pleased with me for having informed my 3 friends of her being under my protection, and she left to my care all the necessary arrangements for obtaining a reconciliation with her father. Now and then we recollected that the time of our separation was near at hand. Our grief was bitter, but we contrived to forget it in the ecstasy of our amorous enjoyment. "Why cannot we belong forever to each other?" the charming girl would exclaim. "It is not my acquaintance with Steffani, it is your loss which will seal my eternal misery." But it was necessary to bring our delightful interview to a close, for the hours were flying with fearful rapidity. I left her happy, her eyes wet with tears of intense felicity. At the dinner table, Monsieur Barbaro told me that he had paid a visit to his relative, Steffani's mother, and that she had not appeared sorry at the decision taken by her son, although he was her only child. He had the choice, she said, between killing himself and turning friar, and he took the wiser choice. The woman spoke like a good Christian, and she professed to be one, but she spoke like an unfeeling mother, and she was truly one, for she was wealthy, and if she had not been cruelly avaricious, her son would not have been reduced to the fearful alternative of committing suicide or of becoming a Capuchin friar. The last and most serious motive which caused the despair of Steffani, who is still alive, remained a mystery for everybody. My memoirs will raise the veil when no one will care anything about it. The Count and his son were, of course, greatly surprised, and the event made them still more desirous of discovering the young lady. In order to obtain a clue to her place of refuge, the Count had resolved on summoning before the Council of 10 all the parties, accused and accusing, whose names he had on his list, with the exception of myself. His determination made it necessary for us to inform him that his daughter was in my hands, and Monsieur de Bragadin undertook to let him know the truth. We were all invited to supper by the Count, and we went to his hostelry, with the exception of Monsieur de Bragadin, who had declined the invitation. I was thus prevented from seeing my divinity that evening, but early the next morning I made up for lost time. As it had been decided that her father would on that very day be informed of her being under my care, we remained together until noon. We had no hope of contriving another meeting, for I had promised to bring her brother in the afternoon. The Count and his son dined with us, and after dinner, Monsieur de Bragadin said, "I have joyful news for you, Count. Your beloved daughter has been found." What an agreeable surprise for the father and the son. Monsieur de Bragadin handed them the promise of marriage, written by Stefani, and said, "This, gentlemen, evidently brought your lovely young lady to the verge of madness when she found that he had gone from C. without her. She left your house, alone, on foot, and as she landed in Venice, Providence threw her in the way of this young man, who induced her to follow him, and has placed her under the care of an honest woman, whom she has not left since, whom she will leave only to fall in your arms as soon as she is certain of your forgiveness for the folly she has committed." "Oh, let her have no doubt of my forgiving her," exclaimed the father, in the ecstasy of joy, and turning to me, "Dear sir, I beg of you not to delay the fortunate moment on which the whole happiness of my life depends." I embraced him warmly, saying that his daughter would be restored to him on the following day, and that I would let his son see her that very afternoon, so as to give him an opportunity of preparing her by degrees for that happy reconciliation. Monsieur Barbaro desired to accompany us, and the young man, approving all my arrangements, embraced me, swearing everlasting friendship and gratitude. We went out, all three together, and a gondola carried us in a few minutes to the place where I was guarding a treasure more precious than the golden apples of the Hesperides. But, alas, I was on the point of losing that treasure, the remembrance of which causes me even now a delicious trembling. I preceded my two companions in order to prepare my lovely young friend for the visit, and when I told her that, according to my arrangements, her father would not see her till on the following day, "Ah," she exclaimed with the accent of true happiness, "then we can spend a few more hours together. Go, dearest, go and bring my brother." I returned with my companions, but how can I paint that truly dramatic situation? Oh, how inferior art must ever be to nature! The fraternal love, the delight beaming upon those two beautiful faces, with a slight shade of confusion on that of the sister, the pure joy shining in the midst of their tender caresses, the most eloquent exclamations followed by still more eloquent silence, their loving looks, which seem like flashes of lightning in the midst of a dew of tears, a thought of politeness which brings blushes on her countenance when she recollects that she has forgotten her duty towards a nobleman whom she sees for the first time. And finally, there was my part, not a speaking one, but yet the most important of all. The whole formed a living picture to which the most skillful painter could not have rendered full justice. We sat down at last, the young countess between her brother and Monsieur Barbaro on the sofa, I opposite to her on a low footstool. "To whom, dear sister, are we indebted for the happiness of having found you again?" "To my guardian angel," she answered, giving me her hand. "To this generous man who was waiting for me, as if heaven had sent him with the special mission of watching over your sister. It is he who has saved me, who has prevented me from falling into the gulf which yawned under my feet, who has rescued me from the shame threatening me, of which I then had no conception. It is to him I am indebted for all, to him who, as you see, kisses my hand now for the first time." And she pressed her handkerchief to her beautiful eyes to dry her tears, but ours were flowing at the same time. Such is true virtue, which never loses its nobleness, even when modesty compels it to utter some innocent falsehood. But the charming girl had no idea of being guilty of an untruth. It was a pure, virtuous soul which was then speaking through her lips, and she allowed it to speak. Her virtue seemed to whisper to her that, in spite of her errors, it had never deserted her. A young girl who gives way to a real feeling of love cannot be guilty of a crime or be exposed to remorse. Towards the end of our friendly visit, she said that she longed to throw herself at her father's feet, but that she wished to see him only in the evening, so as not to give any opportunity to the gossips of the place. And it was agreed that the meeting, which was to be the last scene of the drama, should take place the next day towards the evening. We returned to the Count's hostelry for supper, and the excellent man, fully persuaded that he was indebted to me for his honor as well as for his daughter's, looked at me with admiration and spoke to me with gratitude. Yet he was not sorry to have ascertained himself, and before I had said so, that I had been the first man who had spoken to her after landing. Before parting in the evening, Monsieur Barbaro invited them to dinner for the next day. I went to my charming mistress very early the following morning, and, although there was some danger in protracting our interview, we did not give it a thought, or, if we did, it only caused us to make good use of the short time that we could still devote to love. After having enjoyed, until our strength was almost expiring, the most delightful, the most intense voluptuousness in which mutual ardor can enfold two young, vigorous, and passionate lovers, the young Countess dressed herself, and, kissing her slippers, said she would never part with them as long as she lived. I asked her to give me a lock of her hair, which she did at once. I meant to have it made into a chain like the one woven with the hair of Madame F., which I still wore round my neck. Towards dusk, the Count and his son, Monsieur Dandolo, Monsieur Barbaro, and myself, proceeded together to the abode of the young Countess. The moment she saw her father, she threw herself on her knees before him, but the Count, bursting into tears, took her in his arms, covered her with kisses, and breathed over her words of forgiveness, of love, and blessing. What a scene for a man of sensibility! An hour later, we escorted the family to the inn, and after wishing them a pleasant journey, I went back with my two friends to Monsieur de Bragadin, to whom I gave a faithful account of what had taken place. We thought that they had left Venice, but the next morning they called at the place in a peotta with 6 rowers. The Count said that they could not leave the city without seeing us once more, without thanking us again, and me particularly, for all we had done for them. Monsieur de Bragadin, who had not seen the young Countess before, was struck by her extraordinary likeness to her brother. They partook of some refreshments, and embarked in their peotta, which was to carry them, in 24 hours, to Ponte di Lago Oscuro, on the river Po, near the frontiers of the Papal States. It was only with my eyes that I could express to the lovely girl all the feelings which filled my heart. but she understood the language, and I had no difficulty in interpreting the meaning of her looks. Never did an introduction occur in better season than that of the Count to Monsieur Barbaro. It saved the honor of a respectable family, and it saved me from the unpleasant consequences of an interrogatory in the presence of the Council of 10, during which I should have been convicted of having taken the young girl with me and compelled to say what I had done with her. A few days afterwards, we all proceeded to Padua to remain in that city until the end of autumn. I was grieved not to find Dr. Gozzi in Padua. He had been appointed to a benefice in the country, and he was living there with Bettina. She had not been able to remain with the scoundrel who had married her only for the sake of her small dowry, and had treated her very ill. I did not like the quiet life of Padua, and to avoid dying from ennui, I fell in love with a celebrated Venetian courtesan. Her name was Ancilla. Some time after, the well-known dancer Campioni married her and took her to London, where she caused the death of a very worthy Englishman. I shall have to mention her again in 4 years. Now I have only to speak of a certain circumstance which brought my love adventure with her to a close after 3 or 4 weeks. Count Medini, a young, thoughtless fellow like myself, and with inclinations of much the same cast, had introduced me to Ancilla. The Count was a confirmed gambler and a thorough enemy of fortune. There was a good deal of gambling going on at Ancilla's, whose favorite lover he was, and the fellow had presented me to his mistress only to give her the opportunity of making a dupe of me at the card table. And, to tell the truth, I was a dupe at first. Not thinking of any foul play, I accepted ill luck without complaining. But one day I caught them cheating. I took a pistol out of my pocket, and aiming at Medini's breast, I threatened to kill him on the spot unless he refunded at once all the gold they had won from me. Ancilla fainted away, and the Count, after refunding the money, challenged me to follow him out and measure swords. I placed my pistols on the table and went out. Reaching a convenient spot, we fought by the bright light of the moon, and I was fortunate enough to give him a gash across the shoulder. He could not move his arm and had to cry for mercy. After that meeting, I went to bed and slept quietly. But in the morning, I related the whole affair to my father, and he advised me to leave Padua immediately, which I did. Count Medini remained my enemy through all his life. I shall have occasion to speak of him again when I reach Naples. The remainder of the year 1746 passed off quietly without any events of importance. Fortune was now favorable to me and now adverse. Towards the end of January 1747, I received a letter from the young Countess A.S., who had married the Marquis of blank. She entreated me not to appear to know her, if by chance I visited the town in which she resided, for she had the happiness of having linked her destiny to that of a man who had won her heart after he had obtained her hand. I had already heard from her brother that, after their return to C, her mother had taken her to the city from which her letter was written, and there, in the house of a relative with whom she was residing, she had made the acquaintance of the man who had taken upon himself the charge of her future welfare and happiness. I saw her 1 year afterwards, and if it had not been for her letter, I should certainly have solicited an introduction to her husband. Yet peace of mind has greater charms even than love. But when love is in the way, we do not think so. For a fortnight I was the lover of a young Venetian girl, very handsome, whom her father, a certain Ramon, exposed to public admiration as a dancer at the theater. I might have remained longer her captive if marriage had not forcibly broken my chains. Her protectress, Madame Cecilia Valmarano, found her a very proper husband in the person of a French dancer called Binet, who had assumed the name of Binetti, and thus his young wife had not to become a Frenchwoman. She soon won great fame in more ways than one. She was strangely privileged. Time, with its heavy hand, seemed to have no power over her. She always appeared young, even in the eyes of the best judges of faded, bygone female beauty. Men, as a general rule, do not ask for anything more, and they are right in not racking their brain for the sake of being convinced that they are the dupes of external appearance. The last lover that the wonderful Binetti killed by excess of amorous enjoyment was a certain Moskiewski, a Pole whom fate brought to Venice 7 or 8 years ago. She had then reached her 63rd year. My life in Venice would have been pleasant and happy if I could have abstained from punting at Basset. The ridotti were only open to noblemen who had to appear without masks, in their patrician robes, and wearing the immense wig which had become indispensable since the beginning of the century. I would play, and I was wrong, for I had neither prudence enough to leave off when fortune was adverse, nor sufficient control over myself to stop when I had won. I was then gambling through a feeling of avarice. I was extravagant by taste, and I always regretted the money I had spent, unless it had been won at the gaming table, for it was only in that case that the money had, in my opinion, cost me nothing. At the end of January, finding myself under the necessity of procuring 200 sequins, Madame Manzoni contrived to obtain for me from another woman the loan of a diamond ring worth 500. I made up my mind to go to Treviso, 15 miles distant from Venice, to pawn the ring at the Mont de Piet, which there lends money upon valuables at the rate of 5%. That useful establishment does not exist in Venice, where the Jews have always managed to keep the monopoly in their hands. I got up early one morning and walked to the end of the Canale Reggio, intending to engage a gondola to take me as far as Mestra, where I could take post horses, reach Treviso in less than 2 hours, pledge my diamond ring, and return to Venice the same evening. As I passed along St. Job's Quay, I saw, in a 2-oared gondola, a country girl, beautifully dressed. I stopped to look at her. The gondoliers, supposing that I wanted an opportunity of reaching Mestra at a cheap rate, rowed back to the shore. Observing the lovely face of the young girl, I do not hesitate, but jump into the gondola and pay double fare on condition that no more passengers are taken. An elderly priest was seated near the young girl. He rises to let me take his place, but I politely insist upon his keeping it. End of chapter 18, part 2.
Chapter 19, Part 1, of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, by Giacomo Casanova. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, The Venetian Years, by Giacomo Casanova. Episode 22, Chapter 19, Part 1. I fall in love with Christine, and find a husband worthy of her. Christine's wedding. These gondoliers, said the elderly priest, addressing me in order to begin the conversation, are very fortunate. They took us up at the Rialto for 30 soldi on condition that they be allowed to embark other passengers. And here is one already. They will certainly find more. When I am in a gondola, reverend sir, there is no room left for any more passengers. So saying, I gave 40 more soldi to the gondoliers, who were highly pleased with my generosity, thanked me, and called me Excellency. The good priest, accepting that title as truly belonging to me, entreats my pardon for not having addressed me as such. I am not a Venetian nobleman, reverend sir, and I have no right to the title of Eccellenza. Ah, says the young lady, I am very glad of it. Well, why so, signora? Because when I find myself near a nobleman, I am afraid. But I suppose that you are an illustrissimo. Not even that, signora. I am only an advocate's clerk. So much the better, for I like to be in the company of persons who do not think themselves above me. My father was a farmer, brother of my uncle here, rector of P, where I was born and bred. As I am an only daughter, I inherited my father's property after his death, and I shall likewise be heiress to my mother, who has been ill for a long time and cannot live much longer, which causes me a great deal of sorrow, but it is the doctor who says it. Now, to return to my subject, I do not suppose that there is much difference between an advocate's clerk and the daughter of a rich farmer. I only say so for the sake of saying something, for I know very well that, in travelling, one must accept all sorts of companions. Is it not so, uncle? Yes, my dear Christine, and as a proof, you see that this gentleman has accepted our company without knowing who or what we are. But do you not think I would not have come if I had not been attracted by the beauty of your lovely niece? At these words, the good people burst out laughing. As I did not think that there was anything very comic in what I had said, I judged that my travelling companions were rather simple, and I was not sorry to find them so. Why do you laugh so heartily, beautiful Demigella? Is it to show me your fine teeth? I confess that I have never seen such a splendid set in Venice. Oh, it is not for that, sir, although everyone in Venice has paid me the same compliment. I can assure you that in P all the girls have teeth as fine as mine. Is it not a fact, uncle? Yes, my dear niece. I was laughing, sir, at a thing which I will never tell you. Oh, tell me, I entreat you. Oh, certainly not, never. I will tell you myself, says the curate. You will not, she exclaims, knitting her beautiful eyebrows. If you do, I will go away. I defy you to do it, my dear. Do you know what she has said, sir, when she saw you on the wharf? Here is a very handsome young man who is looking at me, and would not be sorry to be with us. And when she saw that the gondoliers were putting back for you to embark, she was delighted. While the uncle was speaking to me, the indignant niece was slapping him on the shoulder. Why are you angry, lovely Christine, at my hearing that you liked my appearance, when I am so glad to let you know how truly charming I think you? Oh, you are glad for a moment. Oh, I know the Venetians thoroughly now. They have all told me that they were charmed with me, and not one of those I would have ever liked have ever made a declaration to me. What sort of declaration did you want? There was only one sort for me, sir, the declaration leading to a good marriage in church, in the sight of all men. Yet we remained a fortnight in Venice, did we not, uncle? This girl, said the uncle, is a good match, for she possesses 3,000 crowns. She has always said she would marry only a Venetian, and I have accompanied her to Venice to give her an opportunity of being known. A worthy woman gave us hospitality for a fortnight, and has presented my niece in several houses, where she made the acquaintance of marriageable young men. But those who pleased her would not hear of marriage, and those who would have been glad to marry her did not take her fancy. But do you imagine, reverend sir, that marriages can be made like omelets? A fortnight in Venice? That is nothing. You ought to live there at least 6 months. Now, for instance, I think your niece sweetly pretty, and I should consider myself fortunate if the wife whom God intends for me were like her. But even if she offered me now a dowry of 50,000 crowns, on condition that our wedding takes place immediately, I would refuse her. A prudent young man wants to know the character of a girl before he marries her, for it is neither money nor beauty which can assure happiness in married life. Well, what do you mean by character? Asked Christine. Is it beautiful handwriting? No, my dear. I mean the qualities of the mind and the heart. I shall most likely get married some time, and I have been looking for a wife for the last 3 years, but I am still looking in vain. I have known several young girls almost as lovely as you are, and all with a good marriage portion, but after an acquaintance of 2 or 3 months, I found out that they could not make me happy. In what were they deficient? Well, I will tell you, because you are not acquainted with them, and there can be no indiscretion on my part. One, whom I certainly would have married, for I loved her dearly, was extremely vain. She would have ruined me in fashionable clothes, and by her love for luxuries. Fancy! She was in the habit of paying 1 sequin every month to the hairdresser, and at least as much for the pomatum and perfumes. She was a giddy and foolish girl. Now, I only spend 10 soldi in a year on wax, which I mix with goat's grease, and there I have an excellent pomatum. Another, whom I would have married 2 years ago, labored under a disease which would have made me unhappy. As soon as I knew of it, I ceased my visits. Well, what disease was it? A disease which would have prevented her from being a mother, and if I get married, I wish to have children. All of that is in God's hands, but I know that my health is excellent, is it not, uncle? Another was too devout, and that does not suit me. She was so over-scrupulous that she was in the habit of going to her confessor twice a week, and every time her confession lasted at least 1 hour. I want my wife to be a good Christian, but not bigoted. She must have been a great sinner, or else she was very foolish. I confess only once a month, and get through everything in 2 minutes. Is it not true, uncle? And if you were to ask me any questions, uncle, I should not know what more to say. One young lady thought herself more learned than I, although she would every minute utter some absurdity. Another was always low-spirited, and my wife must be cheerful. Hark to that, uncle! You and my mother are always chiding me for my cheerfulness. Another, whom I did not court long, was always afraid of being alone with me, and if I gave her a kiss, she would run and tell her mother. How silly she must have been! I have never yet listened to a lover, for we have only rude peasants in P, but I know very well that there are some things which I would not tell my mother. One had a rank breath, another painted her face, and indeed almost every young girl is guilty of that fault. I am afraid marriage is out of the question for me, because I want, for instance, my wife to have black eyes, and in our days almost every woman colors them by art, but I cannot be deceived, for I am a good judge. Are mine black? You are laughing. I laugh because your eyes certainly appear to be black, but they are not so in reality. Never mind, you are very charming in spite of that. Now that is amusing. You pretend to be a good judge, yet you say my eyes are dyed black. My eyes, sir, whether beautiful or ugly, are now the same as God made them. Is it not so, uncle? I never had any doubt of it, my dear niece. And do you not believe me, sir? No, no, they are too beautiful for me to believe that they are natural. Oh, dear me, I cannot bear it. Excuse me, my lovely Damigella, I am afraid I have been too sincere. After that quarrel we remained silent. The good curate smiled now and then, but his niece found it very hard to keep down her sorrow. At intervals I stole a look at her face, and I could see that she was very near crying. I felt sorry, for she was a charming girl. In her hair, dressed in the fashion of wealthy countrywomen, she had more than 100 sequins worth of gold pins and arrows which fastened the plaits of her long locks as dark as ebony, heavy gold earrings, and a long chain, which was wound 20 times round her snowy neck, made a fine contrast to her complexion, on which the lilies and the roses were admirably blended. It was the first time that I had seen a country beauty in such splendid apparel. 6 years before, Lucy at Pezine had captivated me, but in a different manner. Christine did not utter a single word. She was in despair, for her eyes were truly of the greatest beauty, and I was cruel enough to attack them. She evidently hated me, and her anger alone kept back her tears. Yet I would not undeceive her, for I wanted her to bring matters to a climax. When the gondola had entered the long canal at Marghera, I asked the clergyman whether he had a carriage to go to Treviso, through which place he had to pass to reach P. "I intended to walk," said the worthy man, "for my parish is poor, and I am the same, but I will try to obtain a place for Christine in some carriage travelling that way." "You would confer a real kindness on me if you would both accept a seat in my chaise. It holds 4 persons, and there is plenty of room." "It is a good fortune which we were far from expecting." "Not at all, uncle. I will not go with this gentleman." "Why not, my dear niece?" "Because I will not." "Such is the way," I remarked, without looking at her, "that sincerity is generally rewarded." "Sincerity, sir? Nothing of the sort," she exclaimed angrily. "It is sheer wickedness. There can be no true black eyes now for you in the world, but as you like them, I am very glad of it." "You are mistaken, lovely Christine, for I have the means of ascertaining the truth." "What means?" "Only to wash the eyes with a little lukewarm rose water, or if the lady cries, the artificial colour is certain to be washed off." At those words the scene changed as if by a wand of a conjurer. The face of the charming girl, which had expressed nothing but indignation, spite, and disdain, took an air of contentment and placidity delightful to witness. She smiled at her uncle, who was much pleased with the change in her countenance, for the offer of the carriage had gone to his heart. "Now you better cry a little, my dear niece, and Il Signore will render full justice to your eyes." Christine cried in reality, but it was immoderate laughter that made her tears flow. That species of natural originality pleased me greatly, and as we were going up the steps at the landing place, I offered her my full apologies. She accepted the carriage. I ordered breakfast, and told a vetturino to get a very handsome chaise ready while we had our meal, but the curate said he must first of all go and say his mass. "Very well, reverend sir, we will hear it, and you must say it for my intention." I put a silver ducat in his hand. "It is what I am in the habit of giving," I observed. My generosity surprised him so much that he wanted to kiss my hand. We proceeded towards the church, and I offered my arm to the niece, who, not knowing whether she ought to accept it or not, said to me, "Do you suppose that I cannot walk alone?" "I have no such idea, but if I do not give you my arm, people will think me wanting in politeness." "Well, I will take it, but now that I have your arm, what will people think?" "Perhaps that we love each other, and that we make a very nice couple." "And if anyone should inform your mistress that we are in love with each other, or even that you have given your arm to a young girl?" "I have no mistress, and I shall have none in future, because I cannot find a girl as pretty as you in all Venice." "I am very sorry for you, for we cannot go again to Venice, and even if we could, how could we remain there 6 months? You said that 6 months was necessary to know a girl well." "I would willingly defray all your expenses." "Indeed? Then say so to my uncle, and he will think it over, for I could not go alone." "In 6 months you would know me likewise." "Oh, I know you very well already." "Could you accept a man like me?" "Why not?" "And will you love me?" "Yes, very much, when you are my husband." I looked at the young girl with astonishment. She seemed to me a princess in the disguise of a peasant girl. Her dress, made of bois de Tours, and all embroidered in gold, was very handsome, and cost certainly twice as much as the finest dress of a Venetian lady. Her bracelets, matching the neck chain, completed her rich toilet. She had the figure of a nymph, and the new fashion of wearing a mantle not having yet reached her village, I could see her most magnificent bosom, although her dress was fastened up to the neck. The end of the richly embroidered skirt did not go lower than the ankles, which allowed me to admire the neatest little foot and the lower part of an exquisitely molded leg. Her firm and easy walk, the natural freedom of all her movements, a charming look which seemed to say, "I am very glad you think me pretty," everything, in short, caused the ardent fire of amorous desires to circulate through my veins. I could not conceive how such a lovely girl could have spent a fortnight in Venice without finding a man to marry her, or to deceive her. I was particularly delighted with her simple, artless way of talking, which in the city might have been taken for silliness. Absorbed in my thoughts, and having resolved in my own mind on rendering brilliant homage to her charms, I waited impatiently for the end of the Mass. After breakfast I had great difficulty in convincing the curate that my seat in the carriage was the last one, but I found it easier to persuade him on our arrival in Treviso to remain for dinner and for supper at a small, unfrequented inn, and I took all the expense upon myself. He accepted very willingly when I added that immediately after supper a carriage would be in readiness to convey him to P, where he would arrive in an hour after a pleasant journey by moonlight. He had nothing to hurry him on except his wish to say Mass in his own church the next morning. I ordered a fire and a good dinner, and the idea struck me that the curate himself might pledge the ring for me, and thus give me the opportunity of a short interview with his niece. I proposed it to him, saying I could not very well go myself, as I did not wish to be known. He undertook the commission at once, explaining his pleasure at doing something to oblige me. He left us, and I remained alone with Christine. I spent an hour with her without trying to give her even a kiss, although I was dying to do so, but I prepared her heart to burn with the same desires which were already burning in me by those words which so easily inflame the imagination of a young girl. The curate came back and returned me the ring, saying that it could not be pledged until the day after the morrow in consequence of the festival of the Holy Virgin. He had spoken to the cashier, who had stated that if I liked, the bank would lend me double the sum I had asked. "My dear sir," I said, "you would greatly oblige me if you would come back here from P to pledge the ring yourself. Now that it had been offered once by you, it might look very strange if it were brought by another person. Of course I will pay all your expenses." "Well, I promise you to come back." I hoped he would bring his niece with him. I was seated opposite to Christine during the dinner, and I discovered fresh charms in her every minute, but, fearing I might lose her confidence if I tried to obtain some slight favour, I made up my mind not to go to work too quickly, and to contrive that the curate should take her again to Venice. I thought that there only I could manage to bring love into play, and to give it the food it requires. "Reverend sir," I said, "let me advise you to take your niece again to Venice. I undertake to defray all expenses, and to find an honest woman with whom your Christine will be as safe as with her own mother. I want to know her well in order to make her my wife, and if she comes to Venice our marriage is certain." "Sir, I will bring my niece myself to Venice as soon as you inform me that you have found a worthy woman with whom I can leave her in safety." While we were talking I kept looking at Christine, and I could see her smile with contentment. "My dear Christine," I said, "within a week I shall have arranged the affair. In the meantime I will write to you. I hope that you have no objection to correspond with me." "My uncle will write for me, for I have never been taught writing." "What, my dear child! You wish to become a wife of a Venetian, and you cannot write?" "Is it then necessary to know how to write in order to become a wife? I can read well." "That is not enough, and although a girl can be a wife and a mother without knowing how to trace one letter, it is generally admitted that a young girl ought to be able to write. I wonder you never learned." "There is no wonder in that, for not one girl in our village can do it. Ask my uncle." "It is perfectly true, but there is not one who thinks of getting married in Venice, and as you wish for a Venetian husband you must learn." "Certainly," I said, "and before you come to Venice, for everybody would laugh at you if you could not write. I see that it makes you sad, my dear, but it cannot be helped." "I am sad because I cannot learn writing in a week." "I undertake," said her uncle, "to teach you in a fortnight, if you will only practice diligently. You will know enough to be able to improve by your own exertions." "It is a great undertaking, but I accept it. and I promise to work night and day and to begin tomorrow." After dinner I advised the priest not to leave that evening, to rest during the night, and I observed that, by going away before daybreak, he would reach P in good time, and feel all the better for it. I made the same proposal to him in the evening, and when he saw that his niece was sleepy, he was easily persuaded to remain. I called for the innkeeper, ordered a carriage for the clergyman, and desired that a fire might be lit for me in the next room, where I would sleep, but the good priest said it was unnecessary, because there were 2 large beds in our room, that one would be for me, and the other for him and his niece. "We need not undress," he added, "as we mean to leave very early, but you can take your clothes off, sir, because you are not going with us, and you would like to remain in bed tomorrow morning." "Oh," remarked Christine, "I must undress myself, otherwise I could not sleep, but I only want a few minutes to be ready in the morning." I said nothing, but I was amazed. Christine, then, lovely and charming enough to wreck the chastity of his Xenocrates, would sleep naked with her uncle. True, he was old, devout, without any ideas which would render such a position dangerous, yet the priest was a man. He had evidently felt like all men, and he ought to have known the danger he was exposing himself to. My carnal mindedness could not realize such a state of innocence, but it was truly innocent, so much so that he did it openly and did not suppose that anyone could not see anything wrong in it. I saw it all plainly, but I was not accustomed to such things, and felt lost in wonderment. As I advanced in age and in experience, I have seen the same custom established in many countries amongst honest people whose good morals were in no way debased by it, but it was amongst good people, and I could not pretend to belong to that worthy class. We had no meat for dinner, and my delicate palate was not over satisfied. I went down to the kitchen myself, and I told the landlady that I wanted the best that could be procured in Treviso for supper, particularly in wines. "If you do not mind the expense, sir, trust to me, and I will undertake to please you. I will give you some Gatta wine." "All right, but let us have supper early." When I returned to our room, I found Christine caressing the cheeks of her old uncle, who was laughing. The good man was 75 years old. "Do you know what is the matter?" he said to me. "My niece is caressing me because she wants to leave me here until my return. She tells me that you were like brother and sister during the hour you spent alone together this morning, and I believe it, but she does not consider that she would be a great trouble to you." "Well, not at all, quite the reverse. She will afford me great pleasure, for I think her very charming. As to our mutual behaviour, I believe you can trust both of us to do our duty." "I have no doubt of it. Well, I will leave her under your care until the day after tomorrow. I will come back early in the morning so as to attend to your business." This extraordinary and unexpected arrangement caused the blood to rush to my head with such violence that my nose bled profusely for the quarter of an hour. It did not frighten me, because I was used to such accidents, but the good priest was in a great fright, thinking that it was a serious hemorrhage. When I had allayed his anxiety, he left us on some business of his own, saying that he would return at nightfall. I remained alone with the charming, artless Christine, and lost no time in thanking her for the confidence she placed in me. "I can assure you," she said, "that I wish you to have a thorough knowledge of me. You will see that I have none of the faults which have displeased you so much in the young ladies you have known in Venice, and I promise to learn writing immediately." "You are charming and true, but you must be discreet in P, and confide to no one that we have entered into an agreement with each other. You must act according to your uncle's instructions, for it is to him that I intend to write to make all arrangements." "You may rely on my discretion. I will not say anything, even to my own mother, until you give me permission to do so." I passed the afternoon in denying myself even the slightest liberties with my lovely companion, but falling every minute deeper in love with her. I told her a few love stories which I veiled sufficiently not to shock her modesty. She felt interested, and I could see that, although she did not always understand, she pretended to do so, in order not to appear ignorant. When her uncle returned, I had arranged everything in my mind to make her my wife, and I resolved on placing her during her stay in Venice in the house of the same honest widow with whom I had found a lodging for my beautiful Countess A S. We had a delicious supper. I had to teach Christine how to eat oysters and truffles, which she then saw for the first time. Gatta wine is like champagne. It causes merriment without intoxicating, but it cannot be kept for more than 1 year. We went to bed before midnight, and it was broad daylight when I awoke. The curate had left the room so quietly that I had not heard him. I looked towards the other bed. Christine was asleep. I wished her good morning. She opened her eyes, and leaning on her elbow, she smiled sweetly. "My uncle is gone. I did not hear him." "Dearest Christine, you are as lovely as one of God's angels. I have a great longing to give you a kiss." "If you long for a kiss, my dear friend, come and give me one." I jump out of bed. Decency makes her hide her face. It was cold, and I was in love. I find myself in her arms by one of those spontaneous movements which sentiment alone can cause, and we belong to each other without having thought of it. She happy and rather confused, I delighted, yet unable to realize the truth of a victory won without any contest. An hour passed in the midst of happiness, during which we forgot the whole world. Calm followed the stormy gusts of passionate love, and we gazed at each other without speaking. Christine was the first to break the silence. "What have we done?" she said softly and lovingly. "We have become husband and wife." "What will my uncle say tomorrow?" "He need not know anything about it until he gives us the nuptial benediction in his own church." "And when will he do so?" "As soon as we have completed all the arrangements necessary for a public marriage." "How long will that be?" "About a month." "We cannot be married during Lent." "I will obtain permission." "You are not deceiving me?" "No, for I adore you." "Then you no longer want to know me better?" "No, I know you thoroughly now, and I feel certain that you will make me happy." "And will you make me happy too?" "I hope so." "Let us go up and go to church. Who could have believed that, to get a husband, it was necessary not to go to Venice, but to come back from that city?" We got up, and after partaking of some breakfast, we went to hear mass. The morning passed off quickly, but towards dinner time I thought that Christine looked different to what she did the day before, and I asked her the reason of that change. "It must be," she said, "the same reason which causes you to be thoughtful." "An air of thoughtfulness, my dear, is proper to love when it finds itself in consultation with honour. This affair has become serious, and love is now compelled to think and consider. We want to be married in the church, and we cannot do it before Lent, now that we are in the last days of Carnival. Yet we cannot wait until Easter, it would be too long. We must therefore obtain a dispensation in order to be married. Have I not reason to be thoughtful?" Her only answer was to come and kiss me tenderly. I had spoken the truth, yet I had not told her all my reasons for being so pensive. I found myself drawn into an engagement which was not disagreeable to me, but I wished it had not been so very pressing. I could not conceal from myself that repentance was beginning to creep into my amorous and well disposed mind, and I was grieved at it. I felt certain, however, that the charming girl would never have any cause to reproach me for her misery. We had the whole evening before us, and as she had told me that she had never gone to a theatre, I resolved on affording her that pleasure. I sent for a Jew, with whom I procured everything necessary to disguise her, and we went to the theatre. A man in love enjoys no pleasure but that which he gives to the woman he loves. After the performance was over I took her to the casino, and her astonishment made me laugh when she saw for the first time a faro bank. I had not enough money to play myself, but I had more than enough to amuse her and to let her play a reasonable game. I gave her 10 sequins and explained what she had to do. She did not even know the cards, yet in less than an hour she had won 100 sequins. I made her leave off playing, and we returned to the inn. When we were in our room I told her how much money she had, and when I assured her that all the gold belonged to her, she thought it was a dream. "Oh, what will my uncle say?" she exclaimed. We had a light supper and spent a delightful night, taking good care to part by daybreak, so as not to be caught in the same bed by the worthy ecclesiastic. He arrived early, and found us sleeping soundly in our respective beds. He woke me, and I gave him the ring, which he went to pledge immediately. When he returned 2 hours later, he saw us dressed and talking quietly near the fire. As soon as he came in, Christine rushed to embrace him, and she showed him all the gold she had in her possession. What a pleasant surprise for the good old priest! He did not know how to express his wonder. He thanked God for what he called a miracle, and he concluded by saying that we were made to ensure each other's happiness. End of chapter 19, part 1.